Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to reframe pretty much everything you thought you knew about your body. We usually think of our bodies as these completely separate compartments, right? The brain does the thinking, lungs do the breathing, stomach does the digesting. But what if I told you that the key to unlocking some of the most frustrating full-body medical mysteries actually lies deep within a single microscopic ecosystem? I mean, just think about this question for a second. Can a stomach bug actually cause restless legs? At first glance, that sounds totally ridiculous. How on earth could an issue in your digestive tract make your legs twitch in the middle of the night, or cause you to feel endlessly fatigued, or even trigger a skin condition like rosacea? Well, what we're uncovering today is whether a whole lineup of seemingly unrelated systemic symptoms might actually share one microscopic culprit. So, here's our investigative roadmap. First, we'll look at the mind-gut stress cycle. Then, what happens when the barrier breaks? The SIBO overpopulation problem, gut fermentation and gas, and finally, treating the root cause. Let's dive right in. Starting off with part 1, the mind-gut stress cycle, how your brain and belly talk to each other. We're going to start with the big picture here, looking at how emotional stress literally changes the physical, microscopic environment of your gut. It's a two-way street, and trust me, the traffic is heavy. Our starting point is the brain's central circuitry, specifically something called the emotional motor system, or EMS. When you experience life events, stress, or any kind of emotional arousal, your EMS kicks into gear, activating autonomic and neuroendocrine responses. And here's the thing, this isn't just all in your head. It actually sends physical shock waves straight down to your gastrointestinal tract, directly influencing your bowel symptoms. And this is where it builds into a pretty vicious loop. When physical GI symptoms happen, like cramping or discomfort, they cause emotional distress. That makes sense, right? But then, this distress triggers the release of chemical mediators like cytokines, cortisol, and adrenaline. And those chemicals loop right back up to your brain's emotional motor system. So stress causes gut pain, which releases chemical stress signals, which then causes more brain stress. It's a massive feed-forward cycle. Moving to part 2, when the barrier breaks, the microscopic security checkpoint. Now that we've mapped out that overarching stress loop, let's zoom in microscopically to see what actually happens to the physical lining of your gut when it's under constant distress. I like to think of your intestinal wall like a super complex border crossing. You've got this barrier made of tight junctions, immune cells, and digestive enzymes, all perfectly designed to keep out toxins and bacteria. But when that barrier breaks down, what's medically known as barrier dysfunction, it's essentially like a border crossing with absolutely zero guards on duty. Abnormal antigens and bacteria just slip right through the mucosa. This interacts with your immune cells, sounding a massive cellular alarm and dumping inflammatory mediators straight into your circulation. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this definition of systemic inflammation. Basically, what happens in the gut absolutely does not stay in the gut. Those circulating cytokines create systemic, body-wide inflammation. A localized issue at your gut barrier has suddenly turned into a whole-body emergency. This right here is the physiological bridge between a simple tummy ache and widespread systemic disease. Which brings us to part 3, the SIBO overpopulation problem, when bacteria move into the wrong neighborhood. With our foundation set, it's time to introduce the prime suspect in our mystery, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO. To truly wrap our heads around SIBO, we have to realize that the difference between a healthy gut and a sick one isn't just a simple battle of good versus bad bacteria. It's actually all about location. Normally, your bacteria hang out mostly in the large intestine, waiting patiently to break down poorly digestible starches. But with SIBO, perfectly good bacteria just move into the wrong neighborhood. They overpopulate the small intestine, intercepting and fermenting your food way too early. Let's look at how this plays out. Normally, easily digestible starches, like a simple bowl of white rice, are fully absorbed in the small intestine long before they ever reach the massive bacterial colonies in your colon, where the tougher stuff like beans is handled. But with SIBO, those bacteria have crept way up into the small intestine. Suddenly, even that basic bowl of rice is being fiercely and prematurely fermented. Let's explore that in part 4, gut fermentation and gas, the exhaust fumes of the microbiome. This brings us to the fascinating and, frankly, kind of uncomfortable mechanics of what actually happens when millions of out-of-place bacteria start fermenting your dinner right in the middle of your small intestine. So when these bacteria ferment those undigested starches, they produce massive amounts of gas, specifically hydrogen and methane. And get this, they don't just stay trapped in your digestive tract to cause bloating. These gases actually equilibrate and absorb straight into your bloodstream. Your veins are literally carrying around the exhaust fumes of your microbiome. Crazy, right? Let's trace that path for a second, because these exhaust fumes travel from your gut into your blood. They eventually make their way to the pulmonary capillaries in your lungs. This means you actually exhale the gases produced by your stomach bacteria. It's exactly why doctors can test for a gut infection simply by analyzing the air you breathe out into a little tube. A basic breath test tells us exactly what the microscopic life inside you is up to. And that leads us to our final chapter, Part 5, Treating the Root Cause, connecting the clues to close the case. We know the stress loop, the broken barriers, the bacterial overpopulation, and the circulating gas. Now, for our grand finale, let's see what happens to systemic health when we actually eliminate that overgrowth. The clinical outcomes here are honestly dramatic. When looking at patients treated with rifaximin, which is an antibiotic targeted specifically at the gut, the clearance and improvement rates for SIBO-positive patients are just staggering. That towering spike of symptom clearance you see simply doesn't exist in the SIBO-negative control group. The research explicitly shows significant clinical clearance and improvement, with a p-value of less than 0.001. Now, in plain English, that means there is a less than 1 in 1,000 chance these results are just a fluke. This definitively proves that by evicting these bacteria from the wrong neighborhood, we can stop the microscopic chaos right at its source. And here is where the whole puzzle ties together. By clearing up SIBO, doctors are finding that it doesn't just fix a simple stomachache. A myriad of completely unrelated, frustrating, systemic conditions begin to resolve once that gut barrier is finally allowed to heal and the systemic inflammation drops. This right here is the grand reveal of our mystery. Conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, interstitial cystitis, and yes, even restless leg syndrome, they all share a massive overlap with SIBO. What were once treated as entirely separate, completely isolated conditions are increasingly being viewed through this single lens of gastrointestinal barrier dysfunction. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. If your gut is pulling the strings behind the scenes, isn't it time we started listening to it? The next time you experience an unexplainable symptom, remember this journey. Remember the brain-gut connection, the leaky barriers, and the out-of-place bacteria. Your chronic symptoms might not be isolated mysteries at all, but rather brilliant little clues pointing right back to your gut. Thanks for joining me today, and keep asking questions.